everyone. Thank you for joining me today to talk about some basics of brain healthy cooking. We're going to be going over the 4 main components of a dish to make it delicious with proper sources of each one. So a lot of this information comes from the Healthy Mind Cookbook by Rebecca Katz. I highly recommend it if you're interested in incorporating more brain healthy, nutritious foods into your diet. So to start off with, we have fat. So I have some options to show you some of my favorite products. I have coconut oil. This is really good for high heat cooking. It's also good for raw food making if you want to do lemon bars or something that's sweeter, because coconut has a sweeter flavor to it. And I love Dr. Bronner's. This is a really good company. Another fat that I like to use is Epic Bison tallow. It's really good with high heat. It does have a little bit of a flavor that is kind of animal-like. So if you don't like that, I would definitely recommend switching it up and I wouldn't use it, but it's really good for, again, high heat cooking. And I really like this a lot. So that's something I recommend. Ghee, I love ghee. This is really good for healing your gut in particular. It's also good for high heat cooking. And you definitely want to find grass-fed, good quality. This company is amazing. So yeah, I would recommend using ghee. I use that for most of my cooking, actually. This is my favorite olive oil brand. So olive oil is better for low heat cooking. It definitely goes rancid pretty quickly. It turns into a trans fat really fast, which is actually detrimental to your brain health. So one thing that I like to do with olive oil is I'll use it for more of the raw food. So my salads and things like that, or I'll drizzle it on top after I'm done cooking some food instead of cooking it in the olive oil. Other fats are avocado, butter, nuts, and sesame oil. So what fat does is it distributes a flavor across your palate, creates an even distribution across your entire mouth so you can taste the flavors evenly. It also increases satiety. So it makes you feel full faster, which is what we want. We don't always want to be feeling hungry. And it makes foods high in brain boosting, fat soluble vitamins more bioavailable. So there's vitamins that are water soluble and fat soluble, and the fat is really important for the absorption of these specific vitamins. So we want to incorporate that often. So the next category is acid. So we've got lemons, we've got limes. We can use vinegar, so different types of vinegars. This is a really yummy balsamic. I love balsamic for adding that extra touch to my dishes. And we've got cider vinegar here. So if you want to get a big thing of cider vinegar like that, I would recommend it. But apple cider vinegar is my favorite one to be using in a lot of my dressings and a lot of my dishes as well. So that's why I have a big bottle of it, and it's really good for you. So another one is oranges. You can also use oranges to add acid to your dish. Acids brighten the flavor, and they also increase the absorption of brain boosting minerals and stimulate digestion. So those are also beneficial for our bodies. We want to make sure our digestion is strong and powerful and properly absorbing the food and the nutrients from what we eat. So when acid helps with that, that's why we want to incorporate as much as we can. And it just adds that extra burst of flavor that we're looking for sometimes. We don't really know what's going on. So acid is a good one. I always have these on hand. And so the next one is salt. So sea salt and seaweed. So this is my favorite salt to use is Redmond's. You can also use Celtic, which I have in this plastic bag here. It looks like this. That's a good one to use. Those are my 2 favorite. Himalayan's good. It has a lot of vitamins and minerals. But the only thing about Himalayan is it's a limited resource, so I don't recommend purchasing a lot of Himalayan salt. Those are my 2 favorite. And this is local, which is awesome. So we want to do that as much as possible to have less of an impact on the environment. And another thing for salt that sometimes I'll use is coconut aminos. This is kind of like a sweet and salty. You could also use tamari, which is a soy sauce that doesn't have any gluten in it. So those add a nice umami flavor, which basically gives you this depth of flavor in your mouth that you can taste that is beyond just salt, but it's also a good salt agent. So those are some things for salt, and salt brings out the flavor in foods and moves flavor to the front of your mouth where it's best perceived. It balances with imbalance with potassium, facilitates energy production and cellular metabolism. So it's really beneficial for your body. And I wouldn't worry about putting too much salt on your dish. The only time when salt becomes a worrisome thing to consume is when you are eating a lot of processed foods that contain a lot of salt. It's almost impossible to add that much amount of salt into your dishes to be in comparison to the ones that are coming from canned foods or processed foods. So if you stay away from processed foods and you add in your own salt, then you will most likely be all good. As always, check with your doctor for salt, but most likely it's more beneficial than detrimental to your health to be adding in your own salt. So the next topic is sweet. So we've got maple syrup. This actually comes from Vermont. I'm in Southern California right now, and this got shipped out to me, which is awesome. And I've got some local honey here. These are my two favorite sweeteners. Local raw honey, maple syrup is what I use the most. I will also use stevia if I don't want to increase my sugar content. And so those are the main three things that I personally use. You can also use dates, molasses, and raisins. So sweet tames harsh, sour, or spicy flavors. It rounds out or harmonizes the flavors as well. So sometimes your flavor just feels really harsh, really intense, really sour, or like it's got this flavor profile that just needs a little bit of calming down, and a little bit of sweet will do that. And also what you want to do is, if you incorporate more flavors into your meal, then you'll feel like you are fully satisfied versus wanting to have a dessert after. So sometimes if we just put a touch of maple syrup in, say, our Brussels sprouts, to give it a little bit of a hint of sweet, then ideally when the meal's done, we wouldn't want that candy bar. So that's also something to consider doing, is adding in hints of sweet to your dishes more often. Also increases the sense of pleasure. So one thing too is, if your dish is too sweet, then you add in acids. Then you add in the lemon or the lime or the vinegar. If it's too sour, then you add in the sweetener. So the sweet and the sour balance each other out. So that's how you can kind of tell if you want to shift your dish into one form or the other, or just to create that perfect balance. You kind of find what works best for you in that amount, and you kind of play back and forth until you get the right flavor that you want. If it's too bland, if it just needs like some kind of flavor enhancement, salt is generally what it needs. I usually just use salt and pepper in a lot of my dishes that don't need a lot of other flavors. And I really like to buy good quality food and then just use a simple salt and pepper flavoring, and the right amount of salt really just enhances the dish perfectly. And sometimes you don't need to add more than that. Something to consider. Play around with the right amount of salt that works for you and what your levels are, and see what tastes best. So, and then if it's too salty, you add an acid. So the acid and the salt balance each other out. If it just needs a little bit of a spark, then add lemon or lime at the end of the dish. And that just gives it the brightness, the brightening, and the pop at the end. And then if it's too harsh, add a little bit of maple syrup. So that can just, like I said, it tames down a lot of that spiciness and that intensity of dishes. So you can just bring that back into balance. And so those are the basics of cooking and some recommended products that I like to use. And hopefully this was helpful for you. And hopefully it took away some of your questions that you have on the basics of how to create a dish. So best wishes to you on your cooking path.